Welcome back to Season 2 of the Sweet Taste of Balance podcast series. I'm your host, Dr. Idrees Mughal, and this episode is Living with Type 1 Diabetes, the one nobody talks about. So today we're here with Mathew Lewis-Carter. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, of course. So before we dive into this conversation today and to explore your journey with Type 1 diabetes, could you tell us a little bit about your journey and who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Mathew Lewis-Carter. I'm a content creator, presenter, and a dad now, because that is like my full-time job, being
Congratulations.
a dad. Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of work. It's way harder than they say in the films and the movies. Kids are quite intense in a beautiful way. And I live with Type 1 diabetes. Yeah.
So let's dive into more about Type 1 diabetes in general, right? So let's start off with, many people might not know the difference between Type 1 and Type 2, for example, or might not even know what Type 1 diabetes is. Yeah. So can you tell us, what is Type 1 diabetes and how does it differ from Type 2?
Yeah, so Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. So it's where the beta cells in your pancreas no longer produce insulin. Type 2 diabetes is to do with insulin resistance and it's lifestyle related. And the amazing thing with Type 2 is that it can be reversed as well, which as a Type 1 diabetic, the thought of being able to reverse my condition, I could only dream of. But I was diagnosed when I was 12 years old. So I'm 37 now. So I've been diabetic for well over 20 years. And my brother also has Type 1 diabetes, which is really interesting because nobody else in the family has it.
Yeah.
And there's quite a funny diagnosis story. I can say it's funny now, but at the time, so my brother was diagnosed with Type 1 when he was about 3 or 4.
Oh, wow.
And this is at a time where my parents had no idea what this thing was. The technology was nowhere near what it is today. I think about this a lot now, actually, because when you're diagnosed with Type 1 diabetes, a lot of people, you can get quite selfish with it and think it's about me. But actually, in fact, when you're diagnosed with it, it's almost like your entire family's diagnosed with it as well, because they've got to live through the highs and the lows. So anyway, we were living in Cyprus at the time because my dad was in the military. And I remember my brother squirted his insulin at me. And God, I was about 11, 12. And no word of a lie, I said to him, "Don't squirt your insulin at me. I can produce my own, thanks." And 2 weeks later, I was on a plane back to the UK and I was diagnosed with Type 1 diabetes.
Oh my gosh.
So the mother of all karmas. Like at the time, it wasn't funny, but now me and my brother laugh about it a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, Type 1 diabetes has been a huge part of my life. It's something that everywhere I go, even coming to sit and do a recording like this, I'm constantly checking my glucose levels beforehand. Do I need to have something with me? Am I going to be high? And for me, the physical side of Type 1 has never really affected me, like the injections, the finger pricking, but it's the mental side of living with it. It's never being able to turn off. The only time you can turn off is when your head hits the pillow at night and then you wake up the next day before the day can get started and you're checking your blood glucose levels constantly. And as we were discussing earlier, the advancements in technology since I was first diagnosed has really changed the lives of so many people living with Type 1.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. I mean, before we move on, I want to talk about, have you heard of this research team out of East Asia? When you mentioned, I wish Type 1 diabetes can be reversible, right? Have you seen this now new upcoming research that's done in kind of preclinical models where they've actually gotten stem cells to start producing beta cells, right, to try and replenish the function of the pancreas?
Did they do it with a girl recently that they have
I'm not sure. But I have seen some articles recently coming out of a research team from East Asia where hopefully now in the next 5, 10, 15 years, we might actually see a reversal treatment.
Amazing. And I think about this a lot. So I've got a little girl and I think in a decade's time, she might remember that, I never even had Type 1 diabetes. And the technology is getting so good now in terms of the closed loop systems as well. Yeah. So it's almost like, your pump is speaking to your CGM and, the thought of that 20 years ago, when I was first diagnosed, I'd take one injection in the morning, I'd take an injection in the evening, I would rarely finger prick. And then you kind of navigate the university years as well. That's a big part for people because there's a lot of people with Type 1 diabetes who can get quite selfish about it, but also quite reluctant to tell people they have it.
Of course, yeah.
There was a case at Bristol University a few years back where there was a guy who had too much to drink, and the bouncer kicked him out of the club because, he hadn't had a lot to drink, but he had a hypo. So the bouncer kicked him out of the club, and then he was had to go to hospital after that, because it can be a really difficult condition to navigate, because it affects you so much mentally, it affects you so much physically, and as I said before, you're never able to turn off from it.
And I can see, like, especially during things like university or things like, social environments, right, where you might almost feel embarrassed about having it, and you might be afraid of people seeing you injecting something, or having this device on your arm or something, and it just comes from that kind of ignorance, right? It's that lack of education about it. It's the stigmatization around certain conditions like type 1 diabetes. Did you experience anything like that?
No, I think when I was really lucky when the technology first came along, because I'd lived with it so long without the tech. I was like, if there's any way that this can improve my life, I'm going to jump at it.
Right.
But what's interesting online, I speak to a lot of mums in particular, strangely, who have children with type 1 diabetes. And what's really interesting is that the girls in particular really shy away from showing their tech in public. There are some creators online who are doing great work in that space. I know Jack Whitehall's partner, Roxy Horner, she's a model, and she was diagnosed a few years ago, and she's got to be like close to 30 now, so quite late. But she really owns her CGM, and I think that it's people like that who give other girls confidence. But it is interesting that in particular, navigating teenage years is hard enough anyway.
Yeah.
If you've got to throw an autoimmune disease into that, and you've got to constantly change your pumps, or you've got to constantly change your CGMs, it's really difficult to navigate.
Yeah, no, I can completely see that. Many people still confuse type 1 diabetes with type 2, right? And they assume it's manageable with, just diet, for example, or there are certain lifestyle habits that can cure your type 1 diabetes, right? From a personal perspective for yourself, what would you say is the most frustrating misconception that you face, living with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's something that I get an awful lot of. And I think the big one is always, does that mean you can't eat sugar? And for me, I'm really fortunate now where, because the tech and the advancements has improved so much, I can be really flexible with what I'm putting into my body. Of course, I've got to be aware in terms of certain foods and the blood glucose spikes that I'm going to get. But the big misconception is always, should you be eating that? Or do you have diabetes because you ate too much sugar? There's always a big one as well. Right. That's always one that I think ever since school, that was always one that
like the notion
people would say a lot.
The notion that it's self-induced, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like I chose to live this way when I really didn't.
Funny that you mentioned sugar, right? I see a lot in a lot of conversation in the wellness space that, yes, we know that sugar causes a rise in blood sugar, right? But then we also see the flip side where non-sugar sweeteners also cause a rise in blood sugar, right? As someone living with type 1 diabetes, do you consume non-sugar sweeteners? And if so, what does it do to your blood sugar?
Yeah, I do. So this is a perfect example of this is that what I do, for me, I've always had quite a sweet tooth. Yeah. So for me, my go-to is like Diet Coke. And funny enough, it does nothing to my blood glucose levels. Yeah. If I'm having a hypo and I need something with glucose, a Lucozade, a regular Coca-Cola.
A Diet Coke's not going to fix you. If you're having a hypo.
Exactly. But there's been so many times, actually, I've gone to restaurants. You've got to be, as a type of diabetic, really particular with what you're saying. You can say the Coke Zero or the full fat Coke, because there's been times when you go and you're like, wow, why am I reading so high? Because somebody's got the order wrong. Yeah. But I can categorically say that Diet Coke Zero drinks has no impact on the glucose levels whatsoever.
You would think that like a bit of common sense would apply here, right? It's kind of in the name, non-sugar and then spikes blood sugar. It doesn't really make sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a very common diet myth that is often perpetuated. Thank you for giving us your proof for that.
Yeah, I'm sure you have way more knowledge in this field than me. Where has all the bad rep from aspartame? Where's it all come from?
It's a good point. I think a lot of it comes from the the misconstrued nature of data that comes out. And when I say data, it's not a fault of the researchers doing the studies. It's a fault of how that's then perpetuated and disseminated to the public, right? So for example, headlines on major newspaper journals or newspaper companies, they will take a sentence or they will give a sensationalized title, something like aspartame causes, or aspartame may possibly cause cancer. And it will cite a study and it will talk about some kind of a few sentences about one paper, right? Where actually, if you look at the paper in question and you're able to dissect evidence, you would realize that the researchers never said that at all, right? So it's the way in which public health information is disseminated, whether it's via social media, headlines, articles, that's where the confusion happens. It's almost like Chinese whispers. By the time it's got to the 10th person, the original statement no longer makes, it's completely different to what we're being told. So that's where a lot of the fear-mongering comes from. That's where the conversation around blood sugar also stems from as well. So it's like taking a sentence from a paper or from some kind of findings, or whether it's a personal anecdote as well. There are creators who will say, who are non-diabetic, for example, they will walk around with a CGM. And I'm sure you've seen this as well. People are flaunting the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor, as some sort of health hack or like
it's the next frontier. And
you need to have this to be part of the wellness club, right? And a lot of the misinformation about blood sugar spikes and non-sugar sweeteners is also coming from there as well. So how does it make you feel seeing the growing trend of CGM use across the general population?
Yeah, I'm really mixed with this, because when the technology first came out, I was like, great, this is going to change the lives of so many. I didn't even think about the general population, to be honest. My immediate mindset was like, okay, great, this can help and improve the lives of so many people living with type 1 diabetes. And then when you see creators and fitness influencers using that, and there are still catchment areas within the UK that people still don't have access to this technology. And there's still so many people around the world with people who don't have access to this technology. And I think because I live with type 1 diabetes, I'm very much like a guinea pig to a degree, that I know, and I've got a good understanding of what certain types of foods will do to my glucose levels. But yeah, going back to your previous question, I can categorically say that a Diet Coke or a Coke Zero will do nothing to my glucose levels.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you think the lack of accessibility or the supply is partially exacerbated by general public purchasing these things?
Yeah, I think so. I think to a degree, and I think it's a trend as well. It's just the next frontier, and in the health and wellness space, we're always looking for more and more and more. It's just a constant, we're just looking to better ourselves. But it's really difficult when you're living with an autoimmune disease and you see people who do have access to this technology, whereby there's other people who if they did have access to it could really shave years off their lives.
Absolutely. We know the data that having well-regulated blood glucose levels within the healthy normal ranges for type 1 diabetes can massively improve your quality of life for decades to come, right? And not having access to this life-saving technology is potentially causing irreversible harm to your end organs, which then by the time you get access to it, a lot of damage has already been done.
Well, that's it. And a huge part of it is vision as well. So for everybody who lives with type 1 diabetes, you go for an annual eye screening.
Yeah.
And if your blood glucose levels aren't well managed, your vision will start to go. And I started to have this a few years ago before I got on to the CGMs, before I started to get onto the technology. And now my eyesight has got better because of it as well. Which is, I mean, you do naturally, if you live with type 1 diabetes, you will experience some background retinopathy. That's something that is going to happen. But I cannot tell you enough how amazing this technology is in helping people get their vision back.
That's fantastic.
Because the thought of, and I'm sure we're all the same in here, the thought of losing your vision is utterly petrifying.
No, absolutely. It would affect quality of life in all domains of life.
Absolutely,
right? So quickly, have you ever come across, or has someone told you, whether online or in person, that the carnivore diet will fix your autoimmune disease?
No.
Okay, thank gosh.
No,
Right, thank
no,
gosh.
I haven't.
Okay, good, because thankfully you've not gotten into that realm.
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I
You will hear it soon. Sure.
Yeah. How do you find navigating that online? Like you've really got to batten down the hatches, haven't you?
It's just terrible. I think, especially being in the kind of debunking misinformation space, it's like I'm encouraging the algorithms to show me more of it, which is not good for my own mental health. But thankfully, many people like yourself are not exposed to that level of misinformation, which is fantastic. But there's a common myth that dietary changes can cure like all kinds of autoimmune diseases, and they put type 1 diabetes into this realm, right?
Really? I'm surprised I haven't heard this.
No,
maybe,
good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you haven't.
Maybe the Joe Rogans and the Jordan Petersons haven't come for me just yet.
Not quite yet. But yeah, so talking about diet in general, right? So some people advocate for low carbohydrate or ketogenic style diets like the carnivore diet or a low carb, a kind of animal based heavy diets, to help you stabilize your blood sugar levels. Because obviously when you have lower carb, then there'll be less to kind of navigate. Have dietary changes like these, have they played a role in your routine, and kind of like what's been your journey with these kind of dietary changes?
So to be honest, I tend to not eat my first meal until around 11, 12 o'clock. Okay. Because if you live with type 1 diabetes, you also get this thing called dawn phenomenon, where naturally you'll get a blood glucose spike in the morning. So if I have a blood glucose spike in the morning, and then if I pour a bowl of oats on top of that, it's actually really hard to manage. It's you've got to get the correct dosage right, and if you don't, you can then get a little bit high, and you've got to do correction doses.
Do you know why that phenomenon happens?
Why? Is it the liver? Oh, sorry. I thought you knew, and you were telling me. No. So the dawn phenomenon. It's to do with the liver releasing glucose in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Because
double check me on that, but yeah.
Because of cortisol.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So you've got that to deal with as a type 1 diabetic, and the thought sometimes of pouring a big breakfast of carbohydrates onto that can be really tricky. But equally, I love my health and fitness. I'm really into my running, so I know to fuel myself for that, I've got to have carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And I've just found a way, because I've been type 1 for so long, of understanding what my body needs and when it needs it. I never demonize any foods or any food groups. I've never done that. I just give my body the fuel that it needs. But in theory, I can understand if you live with type 1 diabetes, why you would drop your carbohydrates. It would make sense, just because you have to take less insulin, and generally what we say is less insulin, less problems. The more insulin that you're giving yourself, the greater chance that you're going to have a hypo.
I like that, yeah. Because there's almost like less data points for you to make a mistake on, almost. Exactly. Or like to miscalculate or to, overshoot it.
Well, that's it. Yeah. So imagine every meal. So if you were to have a meal now, I was to have a meal now, I would have a carbohydrate ratio of what I'd need to inject myself for. So it's kind of like 1 to 10. And that's come through years of me trying to understand this, whilst you can just naturally just go and do it. But if I get the dosage wrong of the insulin, it's going to make my levels drop. And having a hypo, similar to what I said before, it's very much like that drunken feeling. You start to slur your words, you're all over the place. And then if you underdo it, your level's going to go really high, and that's when you start to feel really thirsty. You need to go to the toilets a lot. So it's just like constant in between. And as I said previously, look, it's not... The injections have never really bothered me or anything like that. I've probably 4 to 6 injections every single day. Oh. And I'm very good at doing it in public as well. Yeah. It's quite nice. I was on the train the other day and I just saw a guy just doing his insulin on the train just after I'd done mine. And we both just gave each other like a look. Like Spider-Man look in the film. It's kind of like that. Yeah. And it's great. But I think so many people with type 1, they shy away from that just because, look, if you're out in public and maybe if you don't know people as well, it can be quite intimidating if you're just in a restaurant and you're just whipping your skin out and stabbing yourselves.
Of course, because there's this there's this negative connotation to do with anything injection related,
totally.
right? That people think you're like almost like a bad person.
But also in the gym as well. So the gym is, I spend like a lot of time in the gym.
In the
and
fitness
there's
space.
been a lot of times where
They probably think you're shooting up.
Exactly.
Some like PEDs or something.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And because, and again, this is another part, different types of training will impact your glucose levels. High intensity training, strength training will tend to send them up. Low, more endurance-based work will tend to send it down. So after a strength session, I'll tend to dose before, but sometimes I might need to take a correction dose. So yeah, you do get some funny looks in the changing rooms afterwards if you're sticking a needle in your bum.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow. And just out of curiosity, when is the last time that you overshot or kind of mistook the amount of insulin you've been giving yourself?
So on the weekend, yeah.
Really?
So I was at the rugby, and the beauty is with going back to the tech now is that I can see it visually, like straight away. So how this tech works is that you get an arrow going up, so you know when you're going up, and you get an arrow going down.
So it gives you the trend.
So it gives you the trend, which is amazing. But yeah, I had a bit of a fluctuation there, and then do you know what really interested me? I did a type 1 diabetes event with a lady called Anita Beckwith, who's the lead dietitian for diabetes at King's College a few years ago now. And we had like 60 people in the room, and it was like parents of people living with type 1. And she said, look, you just need to get it right. And a lot of data is showing this. You just need to get it right 60% of the time. And there's so many parents in the room that were just like, oh my God, thank God for that. Because so many people get so like specific with numbers that you've got to get it right 100% of the time.
It must be stressful, isn't it?
It's really stressful. And I guess kind of on the other side of the technology as well, like I saw a reel the other day of a woman just saying, I just wish the beeping would stop. I just wish the data points would stop. Every morning I wake up and I see it visually. And don't get me wrong, it's great because it's changed our lives. But then equally you are walking about like a robot and you're so aware to just numbers all the time.
Yeah. You know what's a fascinating talking point here is, I mentioned in a previous episode with our other guests, more data doesn't always mean better outcomes, right? And the reason I said that previously is because, if you're constantly inundated with data, it's like you run the risk of becoming overly anxious about every single data point. That can lead to a stressful response, and ironically, stress will increase your blood sugar as a type 1 diabetic, right? So it's like, how do you find that balance, or can you recall back to when you had less data and less technology, right? Did you think your day-to-day living was more comfortable or less comfortable?
I would definitely think about it less.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I think it's a really great point because it's changed our lives so much, but equally with access to even, I do a lot.
How do you avoid it taking like a hold of your life?
Control of yourself.
Yeah.
It's difficult too because you've got all the information you need about anything is in your pocket now. Whether that information is right or wrong is a whole different story. But the access to the information and the beeping, the buzzing, you're going high, you're going low, you're going high, you're going low. You can never switch off from it. And I've noticed that the last few years that sometimes the access to too much information can be slightly negative to a degree because you can never switch off from it. And, before we had access to these CGMs, I would just go about maybe with 2 injections a day and not think about it so much. But equally, the damage that maybe that was doing to my body. Yeah. So it's, 6 of one.
If it wasn't well regulated.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I hope, this has helped anyone else that might be living with type 1 diabetes. And, I hope it encourages others to be more confident with their diagnosis, and also help educate people that might not even know what type 1 diabetes is.
Yeah.
So, the next time you see someone giving themselves insulin, you might not feel like a negative connotation towards it. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I hope you found benefit in the content. If you're struggling with your type 1 diabetes or you're concerned about managing your blood sugar levels, then please reach out to your doctor. If you have any questions or queries, then please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below.